They thought she was nobody. They thought her silence was weakness, and her cheap clothes were a sign of defeat. When Maya stood before Judge Thorne in the Manhattan Supreme Court, the gallery laughed at her. Preston Sterling, the real estate mogul trying to destroy her life, smirked as his lawyer called her irrelevant and destitute. They were minutes away from taking everything she had. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't check who she really was. They didn't know that the trembling woman in the thrift store blazer was holding a single document that wouldn't just win the case, it would bankrupt every single person in that room. This is the story of how the court treated her like trash, until her true identity shut them all up. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hammered against the pavement, turning the potholes of 4th Avenue into murky, oil-slicked pools. Maya Linwood pulled the collar of her worn beige trench coat tighter around her neck as she locked the iron grate of Linwood Botanicals. The lock was rusted, sticking stubbornly before finally clicking shut with a metallic groan that echoed the ache in her bones. It was barely 5 Lixars p.m., but the sky was already a bruised purple. She turned to leave, but the sound of an engine, smooth, powerful, and arrogant, stopped her cold. A phantom black Rolls-Royce extended wheelbase glided to the curb, displacing a wave of dirty water that splashed just inches from Maya's scuffed boots. The car didn't park. It arrived. The driver's door opened, and a man in a chauffeur's uniform stepped out to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped Preston Sterling. At 42, Preston was the face of Sterling Horizons, a development firm that had been eating up the city block by block. He was handsome in a predatory way, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than Maya's flower shop generated in a year. He didn't look at the rain. He looked at the building, Maya's building, with a mixture of hunger and disgust. "Miss Linwood?" Preston said, his voice smooth like polished glass. "We're doing this again?" Maya didn't flinch. She had been dealing with Preston's acquisitions team for 6 months. This was the first time the shark had swum up to the surface himself. "Mr. Sterling?" Maya replied, keeping her voice level. "My answer hasn't changed since your 3rd offer, or your 30th. The shop is not for sale. My grandmother bought this land in 1952. It stays in the family." Preston chuckled, a low, dry sound. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and ozone. "Family? What family, Maya? I've run the background checks. You're a ghost. No parents, no siblings, just a grandmother who passed away 3 years ago, leaving you a crumbling brick pile that violates 12 different city safety codes." He pulled a folded leather document holder from his inner pocket. "I'm breaking ground on the Sterling Spire in 3 months. Your little weed garden is right where my lobby entrance needs to be. I'm offering you $400,000. That's double the market value. Take it. Buy a condo in the suburbs and find a husband." Maya looked at the check he held out. It was a lot of money for a florist. It was nothing to her, but he didn't know that. "It's not about the money, Preston," she said, using his first name to strip away his power. "It's about legacy. Some things can't be bought." Preston's smile vanished instantly. His eyes went cold, the charm evaporating to reveal the bully underneath. He tucked the check back into his pocket. "Legacy!" He spat the word out. "You think you can stop progress with sentimentality? You're a nobody, Maya. You sell flowers to hipsters. I own half the city council. I have judges on my speed dial who owe me favors for their summer homes in the Hamptons." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you don't sell, I will sue you. I will find a reason. I will bury you in so much litigation that you'll be begging to sell this place just to pay for a public defender. I will take this building, and I will leave you with nothing but legal debt." Maya met his gaze. Her eyes, a striking shade of amber, were unreadable. "Do your worst, Mr. Sterling." Preston stared at her for a long moment, trying to find the fear. When he didn't see it, he sneered, turned on his heel, and got back into the Rolls-Royce. As the car pulled away, the window rolled down just an inch. "You've been warned, little girl," he called out. The car sped off, disappearing into the rainy gloom. Maya stood there for a moment, watching the taillights fade. She reached into her pocket and touched her phone. She could end this now. She could make one call to Zurich, one call to the trustees at the Van der Hoven estate, and Preston Sterling would be an asterisk in a business ledger by morning. But she couldn't. Not yet. The terms of her inheritance were strict. To fully access the family trust and take her seat as the chairwoman of the board, a position her late father had hidden her away from to protect her from corporate kidnappers, she had to live as a civilian for 5 years. No bailouts. No flexing power. She had to prove she could survive the real world without the billions. She had 3 weeks left on the clock. Just 3 weeks. If she used her power now, she forfeited the seat. Preston Sterling wasn't just threatening her shop. He was testing her resolve right at the finish line. Maya turned and walked toward the bus stop. She would have to fight him the hard way, the way normal people fought. And she knew, deep down, that the system wasn't built for normal people. The attack began on a Tuesday morning, 4 days after the confrontation in the rain. It didn't start with a bang, but with a courier. A man in a generic uniform walked into Linwood Botanicals, while Maya was arranging a bouquet of white lilies for a funeral order. He dropped a thick, heavy envelope on the counter. "You've been served," he mumbled, not even making eye contact, and walked out. Maya wiped the pollen from her hands and opened the envelope. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a declaration of war. Sterling Horizons versus Maya Linwood. The claims were absurd. Count 1, endangerment of public safety via structural negligence. Count 2, interference with economic prospect. Count 3, environmental contamination. Preston was claiming that her shop's vintage fertilizer storage from the 1960s had contaminated the groundwater of the adjacent lot, which he already owned, and that her refusal to sell was causing him catastrophic financial injury amounting to $50 million. $50 million. He was suing a florist for $50 million. Maya sat on the stool behind the counter, her hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from rage. It was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. He knew the claims were fake. He knew she hadn't contaminated anything. But he also knew that proving him wrong would require soil samples, structural engineers, and expert witnesses. It would cost tens of thousands of dollars she wasn't supposed to have. She needed a lawyer. The office of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe, not their real name, but it might as well have been, was located above a Thai takeout place in a strip mall. The lawyer, a frantic man named Saul Berkowitz, had a stain on his tie, and files stacked so high on his desk they blocked the window. "$50 million?" Saul whistled, looking at the summons. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Miss Linwood, do you know who represents Sterling Horizons?" "I assume a big firm," Maya said. "The biggest," Saul corrected. "Vanguard and Pierce, specifically Silas Graves. They call him the Grave Digger. He charges $2,000 an hour. I charge $200, and even then, I usually let people pay in installments." Saul tossed the papers back onto the desk. "Look, I'll be honest. You can't win this. Even if you're right, and I believe you are, they will paper you to death. They'll file motions to dismiss, motions to compel, motions for summary judgment. They will schedule depositions in inconvenient locations. They will drain you. My advice? Call him. Ask what he wants. Settle. I can't settle, Maya said, her voice hard. And I won't sell. Saul sighed, looking at her cheap coat and the scuffs on her boots. He saw a stubborn woman about to be crushed by a steamroller. Okay, but I need a retainer. 5,000 up front. And that's just to file the answer. Maya wrote the check. It drained her personal savings, the money she had earned from the shop, not the family money, down to double digits. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation. The discovery phase was brutal. Silas Graves, Preston's high-priced attorney, sent over a request for documents that was 80 pages long. They wanted every receipt Maya had filed since 2015. They wanted her medical records. They wanted her grandmother's death certificate. They even demanded access to her personal emails to prove she wasn't conspiring to sabotage Sterling Horizons. Maya spent her nights drowning in paperwork, photocopying receipts at the local library, because she couldn't afford a professional service. She stopped sleeping. Dark circles formed under her amber eyes. Then came the deposition. It was held in the glass-walled conference room of Vanguard and Pierce on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view was breathtaking, overlooking the very city Preston was trying to buy. Maya sat on one side of a mahogany table that was longer than her entire shop. Saul sat next to her, looking small and nervous in his ill-fitting suit. Across from them sat Silas Graves. Silas was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian silk. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared at Maya as the court reporter typed. "Miss Linwood," Silas began, his voice bored. "Is it true that your gross income last year was only $32,000? "Objection. Relevance," Saul squeaked. "It goes to her ability to maintain the property," Silas countered smoothly, not even looking at Saul. "Answer the question." "Yes," Maya said. And yet, Silas slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of Maya at a charity gala in Paris, taken 5 years ago. She was in the background, blurry, but wearing a dress that looked expensive. "We found this on a social media archive. You seem to have expensive tastes for a florist. Are you hiding assets, Miss Linwood? Are you engaging in fraud?" Maya's heart hammered. They were digging. If they dug too deep, they would find the trust. If they found the trust before the 5 years were up, her grandfather's clause would kick in. Any public revelation of status prior to the term's end results in forfeiture of control to the board of directors. She had to lie, but she couldn't perjure herself. "That was a thrift store find," Maya said, her voice trembling. "I used to travel before my grandmother got sick. I spent all my savings." Silas stared at her. He knew she was hiding something, but he assumed it was illegal income or debt, not billions. "Pathetic," Silas muttered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "You're a squatter, Miss Linwood, a squatter in a city of builders. Mr. Sterling is offering you a lifeline. Why are you so intent on drowning?" "Because it's my home," Maya said. "It's a parking lot," Silas corrected, "and soon it will be ours." He closed his folder. "We're done here. I'll see you in court, Miss Linwood. I suggest you bring a toothbrush. You might be going to jail for fraud by the time we're done with you." Maya left the building, shaking. She checked her phone. 2 days. She had 2 days left until the 5-year term was up, but the court hearing, the summary judgment where Judge Thorne would likely rule against her, was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Preston had expedited the hearing. He had pulled strings. He was trying to crush her 24 hours before she became the most powerful woman in the state. She stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the towering steel of the Sterling building. She had no money left for Saul. She had no experts. She had nothing but the truth. And in this city, the truth was worth less than the shoe polish on Preston Sterling's loafers. Unless... Maya pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 4 years and 11 months. "The number you have dialed is for priority banking clients only," a robotic voice said. "Please enter your access code." Maya's fingers hovered over the keypad. If she entered the code, the GPS would ping. The security team would be alerted. The board would know she broke silence. Wait, she thought. The hearing is tomorrow at 10. What is that? 8 a.m. The 5-year mark expires tomorrow at 12. 6 p.m. Noon exactly. If she could stall the court for 2 hours. Just 2 hours. She could walk in as a pauper and walk out as a queen. But Judge Thorne was known for being fast, brutal, and impatient. He wouldn't give her 2 hours. He wouldn't give her 2 minutes. Maya closed her eyes. She had to gamble. She hung up the phone. She would go into that courtroom alone. She would face the lion, and she would pray that she didn't get eaten before the clock struck 12. The Manhattan Supreme Court was a majestic building, meant to inspire awe and a sense of justice. To Maya, walking in on that Wednesday morning, it felt like the mouth of a beast. The courtroom for Sterling versus Linwood was packed. Preston Sterling had invited the press. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted every other small business owner in the district to see what happened when you said no to him. Maya walked down the center aisle. She wore her best suit, a charcoal grey ensemble from a department store sale rack. It was clean, but compared to the sea of navy blue Armani and pinstriped Brooks Brothers on the other side of the aisle, she looked like the help. Saul Berkowitz met her at the defendant's table. He looked pale. "Maya," he whispered, sweating. "I just heard who the judge is. It's Thorne. Harold Thorne. He plays golf with Preston Sterling's father. We need to request a recusal." "We can't," Maya said, checking her watch. 9:45 a.m. "A recusal motion takes weeks. They'll grant a temporary injunction and kick me out of the building while they decide. I lose possession today if we delay." "You lose possession today if we don't?" Saul hissed. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harold Thorne swept into the room. He was a large man with a red face and white hair, looking every bit the part of the establishment. He didn't sit. He slammed his gavel down with unnecessary force. "Docket number 4492, Sterling Horizons versus Linwood," Thorne barked. "Let's get this over with. I have a lunch appointment." Preston Sterling sat in the front row, right behind his lawyer, Silas Graves. He caught Maya's eye and winked. It was a slow, deliberate wink that made Maya's stomach turn. Silas Graves stood up. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of a property owner, my client, being held hostage by a tenant who is violating multiple safety statutes. We are asking for immediate eviction and damages." "And the defense?" Judge Thorne looked at Saul with open disdain. Saul stood up, his papers trembling in his hands. "Your Honor, the allegations are fabricated. We request time to gather soil samples to refute the contamination claim." "Time?" Judge Thorne laughed. "Mr. Berkowitz, your client has had months. This court does not look kindly on stalling tactics used by squatters to extort honest businessmen." "I am not a squatter." Maya stood up, her voice ringing out clear and angry. The courtroom went silent. Saul pulled at her sleeve, terrified. "Maya, sit down!" "Sit down, young lady," Judge Thorne roared, "or I will hold you in contempt." "I own that land," Maya said, remaining standing. She checked the clock on the wall. 10:15 a.m. 1 hour and 45 minutes to go. She had to keep them talking. She had to cause a scene. "Mr. Sterling is abusing the legal system to bypass zoning laws. He knows that if he evicts me today, he can bulldoze the building tomorrow, destroying the evidence that there is no contamination. Judge Thorne narrowed his eyes. He leaned over the bench. You listen to me, Miss Linwood. You are a nobody in this town. You are wasting the court's time, and you are wasting my time. I have read the filings. The evidence provided by Mr. Graves is substantial. It's forged, Maya shouted. That is a serious accusation, Silas Graves said smoothly. Your Honor, I move for immediate summary judgment. The defendant is clearly unhinged and desperate. Agreed. Judge Thorne reached for his gavel. I've heard enough. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Damages are awarded in the amount of— Wait! Maya screamed. The gallery murmured. Even Preston looked annoyed now. I have a witness, Maya lied. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break a rib. A witness who saw Mr. Sterling's team planting chemicals on my property. Judge Thorne paused. Procedurally, if she claimed a witness, he had to at least ask. Who is this witness? Thorne demanded. They are not on the list. He is en route, Maya stammered. Traffic. He will be here by noon. Thorne scoffed. Noon? You think I'm going to recess for 2 hours on the word of a hysterical florist? If you don't, Maya said, her voice dropping to a steely calm, I will file a complaint with the Judicial Oversight Committee, citing your relationship with the Sterling family. I know you were on his yacht last August, Your Honor. The Sea Witch. Nice boat. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Saul dropped his pen. Preston Sterling stopped smiling. Maya had done her homework. She had used the public library computers to track Thorne's social media tags. It was a risky move, blackmailing a judge in open court, but it was all she had. Judge Thorne's face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He knew she was right. If he ruled now, after that accusation, it would look like corruption. He needed to cool the room down. You are treading on thin ice, Miss Linwood, Thorne hissed. Very thin. But to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I will grant a recess. He slammed the gavel. Court is in recess until 12 p.m. If your witness isn't here by then, not only will I rule against you, I will have you arrested for perjury and slander. Get out of my sight. Maya collapsed back into her chair. 10:30 a.m. She had bought the time, but she had no witness. She turned to Saul. I need to make a phone call. Private. Saul looked at her like she was an alien. Maya, what did you just do? You don't have a witness. You're going to jail. No, Saul, Maya said, standing up and smoothing her cheap skirt. I'm not going to jail. I'm going to make a withdrawal. She walked out of the courtroom, past the sneering face of Preston Sterling. Enjoy your last hour of freedom, Preston whispered as she passed. Maya didn't answer. She walked straight to the bathroom, locked herself in the handicap stall, and pulled out her phone. She watched the digital clock on her screen tick. 11, 11:30, 11:45, 11:55. At 11:58 a.m., she dialed the number. Access code confirmed, the robotic voice said. Welcome back, Chairwoman van der Hoeven. The restrictions on your trust have expired. You have full operational control. How may we assist you? Maya took a deep breath. Her voice changed. The tremble was gone. The florist was gone. This is Maya van der Hoeven, she said. Connect me to the legal department of Van der Hoeven Global. Activate the Scorched Earth protocol, and get a helicopter to the roof of the Manhattan Supreme Court. I have a meeting at noon. Yes, ma'am. ETA 3 minutes. Maya hung up. She unlocked the stall door and looked in the mirror. She splashed water on her face, washing away the fatigue. It was time to go back inside. The courtroom clock ticked over to 12:01 p.m. Judge Thorne sat on his bench, looking at the empty witness stand with a smirk of triumphant satisfaction. He had already drafted his ruling in his head. He would evict Maya, award legal fees to Sterling, and perhaps even issue a bench warrant for her slanderous comments earlier. "Well, Miss Linwood," Thorne boomed, his voice echoing off the wood-panelled walls, "it seems your phantom witness has failed to materialize. As I promised, this court will not be mocked." Preston Sterling leaned back in his chair, chuckling audibly. Silas Graves began packing his briefcase, already mentally billing his client for the victory. "Stand up!" Thorne commanded Maya. Maya stood, but she didn't look defeated. She was looking at the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Maya said softly, "but my counsel has just arrived." "Mr. Berkowitz is right next to you," Thorne scoffed. "Not him," Maya said. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom didn't just open. They were flung wide by two court officers who looked terrified. A phalanx of men and women in dark, impeccably tailored suits marched in. There were 12 of them. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that sucked the air out of the room. They didn't carry battered briefcases like Saul. They carried slim, leather-bound folios stamped with a gold crest, a lion rampant, holding a key. The air in the courtroom changed instantly. It grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of immense, unchecked power. Leading the pack was a man who made Silas Graves look like a public defender. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a face that had been on the cover of Forbes and The American Lawyer more times than Preston Sterling had closed deals. It was Arthur Pendleton, the managing partner of Pendleton, Voss and Crane, the kind of lawyer who didn't handle traffic tickets or evictions. He handled mergers of nations and the defense of royalty. The courtroom fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her jaw hanging open. Arthur Pendleton walked straight past the bar, ignoring the bailiff, and stopped directly in front of Maya. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Preston. He turned his back to the bench, bowed his head slightly to Maya, and spoke in a voice that carried to the back of the room. "Apologies for the delay, Chairwoman. The air traffic over Manhattan was heavier than anticipated. The helicopter had to reroute." Chairwoman. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Preston Sterling stood up, his face losing all color. "What is this? Who are you?" Arthur Pendleton turned slowly. He looked at Preston the way a human looks at a cockroach. "I am Arthur Pendleton, and I am assuming representation for the defendant, effective immediately." Judge Thorne found his voice, though it squeaked slightly. "Mr. Pendleton, you are representing a florist in an eviction case?" "I am representing the Vanderhoven estate," Pendleton corrected, his voice ice-cold. "And the woman standing before you is not merely a florist. She is Maya Elizabeth Vanderhoven, the sole heiress to the Vanderhoven banking and shipping fortune, and as of 12 o'clock today, the controlling owner of the land you are sitting on." A gasp ripped through the gallery. The press reporters in the back row began frantically typing on their phones. Vanderhoven. The name was legendary. It was old money. Money that whispered rather than shouted. Money that built universities and bailed out governments. "That's a lie," Preston shouted, panic rising in his chest. "She's a nobody. She wears thrift store clothes. She's broke." Maya stepped forward, moving past Saul, who had fainted back into his chair. She looked at Preston. Her posture had changed. The slump of the exhausted worker was gone, replaced by the regal bearing she had been trained in since birth. "I wore those clothes because I chose to, Preston," Maya said. "And I lived on a budget because my grandfather believed that to lead an empire, one must first understand what it means to serve it. I spent 5 years learning what it feels like to be bullied by men like you. And now, Now I'm done learning." She turned to Pendleton. "Arthur, give them the paperwork." One of the junior associates stepped forward and placed a single, thick document on the judge's bench. It wasn't a motion. It was a deed of trust, certified by the High Court of The Hague and the State of New York. "This document," Pendleton announced, "certifies that the property at 4th Avenue, Linwood Botanicals, is held in a perpetual trust. It cannot be sold, seized, or condemned without the direct signature of the chairwoman. Furthermore, it reveals that the plaintiff, Sterling Horizons, has no standing to sue." "No standing?" Silas Graves sputtered. "We own the adjacent lot." "Actually," Pendleton smiled, a terrifying expression that didn't reach his eyes, "you don't." The silence that followed Arthur Pendleton's statement was heavy enough to crush bone. "Explain yourself, counselor," Judge Thorne demanded, though his hands were shaking as he held the document. He knew the name Pendleton. He knew that if Pendleton was here, the game was rigged and Thorne was on the losing side. "It is quite simple, Your Honor," Pendleton said, pacing the floor like a shark in a tank. "Mr. Sterling's company, Sterling Horizons, is leveraged, heavily, to finance the Sterling Spire project. He took out a mezzanine loan of $300 million 3 weeks ago." Preston's face went grey. "That's confidential financial information." "Not to the lender, it isn't," Pendleton countered smoothly. "The loan was originated by First Sovereign Mercantile." Preston nodded nervously. "So what? That's a bank." "That is a subsidiary," Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. "Of Vanderhoven Global." She took a step toward the plaintiff's table. "You borrowed money from my family to try and steal my land, Preston. And when you signed that loan agreement, you agreed to a standard clause. Section 4, paragraph C. The lender reserves the right to call in the full value of the loan immediately if the borrower engages in unethical legal practices that damage the lender's reputation or assets." Maya pointed to the ceiling. "I am the lender. You are attacking my asset. You are damaging my reputation." Pendleton snapped his fingers. Another associate handed a document to Preston. "This is a notice of default," Pendleton said. "Miss Vanderhoven is calling in the loan. You owe the Vanderhoven estate $300 million, payable immediately." "I don't have that kind of cash on hand," Preston stammered. "It's tied up in construction. This is insane. You can't do this." "We can and we have," Pendleton said. "Since you cannot pay, per the terms of the agreement, the collateral is forfeit. The collateral being the deed to the adjacent lot and Sterling Horizons itself." Preston slumped back into his chair. He looked at Silas Graves for help, but the high-priced lawyer was already distancing himself, physically inching his chair away from his client. "Your Honor," Silas said, weakly, "if these documents are authentic—" "They are," Judge Thorne croaked. He looked at Maya with a mixture of terror and awe. He realized that the nobody he had threatened to throw in jail could buy his entire courthouse and turn it into a storage locker. "Miss Vanderhoven," Thorne stammered, his tone shifting to obsequious politeness. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding. Clearly the court was not in possession of all the facts." "Oh, the court had the facts," Maya said, her eyes drilling into the judge. "The court just didn't care because the defendant was poor. You were ready to ruin my life an hour ago, Judge Thorne. You were ready to let him bulldoze my history because he bought you a steak dinner and took you on his boat. That is, I assure you." Thorne was sweating profusely now. "Arthur," Maya said, not looking away from the judge, "file the motion for judicial misconduct and include the photos of Judge Thorne on the Sea Witch, the ones my private investigators took last summer." "Already filed with the State Review Board this morning, Chairwoman," Pendleton replied, "and we have taken the liberty of leaking them to the New York Times. They should be on the website, right about now. A buzz of notifications went off on the phones in the gallery. Reporters gasped. The story was live. Supreme Court judge caught in corruption, scandal with developer. Judge Thorne banged his gavel, but there was no power in it. "This court is adjourned," he squeaked, then stood up and fled the courtroom through his chamber's door, his black robes billowing behind him like the wings of a fleeing crow. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped the rail to get to Meyer. Preston Sterling remained seated, staring at the table. He was ruined. In the span of 10 minutes, he had lost his case, his project, his company, and his dignity. Meyer walked over to him. She didn't gloat. She didn't shout. She just leaned down and whispered, "You called me a nobody, Preston. You said I was a ghost. You were right. I was a ghost, haunting this courtroom. And now I'm the nightmare you'll never wake up from." She straightened up and turned to Arthur. "Get the car. We have a board meeting to attend." "Yes, Chairwoman." Meyer walked out of the courtroom, the sea of lawyers parting for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look back at the stunned gallery. She didn't look back at the ruined developer. She walked out into the sunlight of Center Street, where the rain had finally stopped. 3 days after the verdict that shook the foundations of Manhattan's legal world, the headquarters of Sterling Horizons felt less like a corporate office, and more like the deck of the Titanic in its final moments. The atmosphere on the 30th floor was suffocating. The phones, usually ringing off the hook with deals and zoning approvals, were eerily silent. Instead, the dominant sound was the rhythmic, grinding, mechanical whine of industrial shredders. Employees, the same ones who had sneered at Meyer's grandmother's shop from their office windows, were now frantically packing boxes, stealing staplers, and avoiding eye contact with one another. Inside the executive suite, the air conditioning was set to a freezing 60 degrees, but Preston Sterling was sweating through his bespoke shirt. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the skyline he believed he owned. His hands, usually steady enough to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, were trembling violently as he tried to pour a glass of amber scotch. He missed the glass. The expensive liquor splashed onto the mahogany desk and soaked into a stack of unanswered legal notices. But Preston didn't even notice. He was watching his phone. He had called Senator Davies 3 times. He had called the deputy mayor. He had even called his golf partner, Judge Thorne. No one answered. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship, and Preston was the captain, chained to the wheel. "Mr. Sterling." His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. She sounded tearful, her voice shaking. "I told you, hold all calls!" Preston screamed, hurling the crystal decanter across the room. It shattered against the wall, leaving a wet, jagged stain on the silk wallpaper. "I am not speaking to the press. Tell them I'm in a meeting." "It's not the press, sir," the assistant whispered, her voice barely audible over the intercom. "It's the new management." Preston froze. "What new management? I am the CEO. I am the chairman. I own 51% of the voting stock." Not anymore. The heavy double doors to his office didn't open. They were pushed aside with a force that suggested absolute authority. Meyer Linwood walked in. The transformation was so total, so jarring, that for a split second, Preston's brain refused to recognize her. Gone was the beige trench coat. Gone were the scuffed boots and the messy bun held together by a pencil. The woman standing in his doorway was a vision of corporate lethality. She wore a midnight blue power suit that was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, the sharp lines accentuating her posture. Her hair was styled in a sleek, severe bob that framed her face like a helmet of war. She didn't look like a florist. She looked like the CEO of a company that ate other companies for breakfast. Flanking her were 2 hulking security guards in black suits, and just behind her shoulder stood Arthur Pendleton, holding a leather folio like a weapon. "Get out!" Preston roared, though his voice cracked. "Get the hell out of my office! Security! Remove these trespassers!" Maya didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She walked calmly across the plush Persian rug, the heels of her Louboutins clicking rhythmically. Click, 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 like the ticking of a countdown clock. "Security works for me now, Preston," Maya said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It wasn't the voice of the woman who had begged him to save her shop. It was the voice of Maya van der Hoven. "And as for your office, Arthur." Arthur Pendleton stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. At 8:45 a.m. this morning, the Board of Directors of Sterling Horizons held an emergency session. Given the triggering of the bad actor clause in your loan agreement with Van der Hoven Global and the subsequent recall of the $300 million debt, the board voted unanimously to accept a hostile acquisition offer to avoid immediate Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Arthur dropped a heavy file onto the wet, liquor-stained desk. It landed with a dull thud that echoed in the silent room. "You have been removed as CEO for cause," Arthur continued, his tone dry and professional. "Your stock options have been liquidated to cover a portion of the debt. You are, effective immediately, unemployed." Preston stared at the file. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy. "You can't do this. I built this. I built this from nothing." "You built it on debt and bullying," Maya corrected. She walked around the desk, invading his personal space. Preston stumbled back, collapsing into his leather executive chair, the throne he had ruled from for a decade. Maya placed her hands on the armrests of the chair, trapping him. She leaned down, her face inches from his. "Do you remember what you said to me in the rain, Preston? You said I was a nobody. You said I was a squatter, standing in the way of progress. You told me that money was the only language the world understood." Maya's amber eyes burned with a cold, hard light. "Well, I'm speaking your language now. Do you understand it?" "I'll sue you," Preston whimpered, shrinking away from her. "I'll tie this up in court for years. I have connections." "You have nothing," Maya whispered. "We bought your lawyers, Preston. Vanguard and Pierce dropped you this morning because their retainer check bounced. And your connections? They saw the photos of Judge Thorne. No one will answer your calls. You are radioactive." She straightened up and looked around the office, her gaze sweeping over the expensive art, the wet bar, the panoramic view of the city. "This view," Maya mused. "You sat up here, looking down on my grandmother's shop like it was a stain on your shoe. You planned to bulldoze 50 years of history just to build a lobby for your ego." "It was a business decision," Preston cried, tears finally spilling over. "The Sterling Spire would have been a monument." "And now it will be a memory," Maya said. "I'm cancelling the project." Preston's jaw dropped. "What? You can't. The permits are pulled. The steel is ordered. You'd be throwing away millions of dollars. It's insane." "I'm a Van der Hoven, Preston," Maya said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "We don't worry about millions. We worry about legacies." She walked to the window and pointed down at the construction pit below, the gaping wound in the earth next to her shop. "I'm filling that hole in," she declared. "I'm tearing down the fences, and in its place, I'm building a community garden, a green space for the city. It will be open to everyone, no entry fee, no VIP list. And do you know what I'm going to name it?" Preston shook his head, unable to speak. "The Linwood Gardens," Maya said. "Every time you walk past this block, Preston, you're going to see children playing on the land you tried to steal. You're going to smell the flowers you tried to poison. That is my monument." She turned back to the security guards. "Escort Mr. Sterling out of the building. He has 5 minutes to collect his personal effects. If he touches a computer or a file, arrest him for corporate espionage." 5 minutes? Preston gasped. "But my contacts, my awards." 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Maya checked her Rolex. 2 burly guards stepped forward, hoisting Preston up by his armpits. He didn't walk out with dignity. He kicked and screamed, his expensive Italian loafers skidding on the carpet. "You'll regret this," Preston shrieked as they dragged him toward the door. "You're a witch! You're a crazy plant lady!" "And you," Maya called out after him, her voice ringing clear and final, "are a trespasser." The doors slammed shut, cutting off his screams. Silence returned to the office, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a vacuum being filled. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, breaking the tension. He looked at Maya with a mixture of respect and mild concern. "That was decisive, Chairwoman," Arthur said, "though the shareholders might have a heart attack when they hear you're turning prime Manhattan real estate into a park." Maya walked over to Preston's desk. She picked up the framed photo of him, shaking hands with the mayor, and placed it face down in the trash can. "The shareholders will be fine, Arthur. The publicity from saving a historic neighborhood will boost our ESG rating by 10 points. It's good for the brand." Arthur smiled. "You really are your grandfather's granddaughter. He always said philanthropy was the best form of marketing." Maya sighed, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving her exhausted. She looked at the mess on the desk, the spilled scotch, the hostile takeover papers. It felt dirty. It felt necessary, but dirty. "And Judge Thorne?" she asked, looking out the window. "Resigned an hour ago," Arthur reported. "The State Ethics Committee opened an investigation the moment the New York Times article went live. He's facing disbarment and likely criminal charges for bribery. He'll never wear a robe again." "Good," Maya said quietly. "It's done. So," Arthur opened his folio, clicking his pen, "now that we control Sterling Horizons, we have a transition meeting with the operations team in 20 minutes. Then we need to discuss the liquidation of Mr. Sterling's assets to cover the—" "Not today, Arthur," Maya interrupted. Arthur paused. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Not today." Maya turned away from the window. She walked to the door, stepping over the shattered glass of the decanter. "But Chairwoman, you own the company. You have to take command." "I have taken command," Maya said. "I fired the problem. The rest is just paperwork, and that's what I pay you for." She checked her watch again. "It's Friday afternoon. I have a wedding order to arrange at the shop. The bride wants cascading lilies, and if I don't get the stems soaking within the hour, they'll wilt." Arthur stared at her, dumbfounded. "You're going back to the flower shop, after all this?" Maya paused at the door, her hand on the brass handle. She looked back at the cold, impressive, soulless executive suite. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft but firm, "this office is power. But that shop is life, and I will never let anyone make me choose between them again." She opened the door and walked out, leaving the billions of dollars behind her, heading back to the only place that truly mattered. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Thorne's courtroom, and the city landscape had shifted in ways no one had predicted. Where there had once been a muddy, desolate pit fenced off by Sterling Horizons warning signs, there was now a miracle of urban greenery. The scaffolding and heavy machinery were gone, replaced by winding cobblestone paths and wrought iron benches. The angry roar of excavators had been silenced, superseded by the rustle of leaves and the distant, happy shrieks of children playing tag. Maya Linwood stood at the threshold of her shop, her hands resting on the doorframe. The late afternoon sun bathed 4th Avenue in a warm, golden haze. a stark contrast to the relentless grey rain that had soaked her the day Preston Sterling first threatened her. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the city. It didn't smell like exhaust and wet concrete anymore. It smelled of jasmine, freshly turned earth, and the sweet cherry blossoms that lined the perimeter of the new park next door. A modest bronze plaque was mounted on the stone gate of the entrance. It read, Linwood Gardens, dedicated to the memory of Eleanor Linwood. May we all bloom where we are planted. Inside the shop, Linwood Botanicals was humming with a quiet, steady energy. It wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of a business on the brink of collapse, but the sturdy rhythm of an institution that had weathered the storm. Buckets of hydrangeas, peonies, and wild roses lined the floor, their colours vibrant against the worn brick walls. Maya walked back behind the counter and picked up a pair of shears. She was working on a centerpiece for a retirement party, a cascade of deep blues and silvers. Despite the billions of dollars now at her fingertips, despite the fact that she could buy the entire floral supply chain of the Netherlands if she chose to, Maya still trimmed the thorns herself. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a visitor. Maya didn't look up immediately. "Be right with you," she called out, stripping the leaves from a stem of eucalyptus. "Take your time, chairwoman. I'm on the clock. But for you, the meter is off." Maya smiled and looked up. Standing there was Saul Berkowitz. But this wasn't the Saul of 6 months ago, the man who sweat through his shirts and carried his files in a plastic bag. This Saul stood taller. He was wearing a navy suit that actually fit his shoulders, his tie was silk, and his leather briefcase looked sturdy and new. "Saul," Maya said, wiping her hands on her green canvas apron. "You look expensive." Saul laughed, a genuine hearty sound that filled the small shop. "I feel expensive, Maya, or maybe just competent. It's amazing what happens to a lawyer's confidence when he stops losing sleep over rent." He walked over to the counter, resting his hand on the polished wood. "I just came from the Queen's Courthouse. We stopped a mega mall developer from seizing a family bakery on Roosevelt Avenue, used the sterling precedent to bury them in paperwork before they even filed the eviction notice." Maya's eyes sparkled. "So, the fund is working?" "Working." Saul shook his head in disbelief. "Maya, the Vanderhoven Small Business Defense Fund is the terror of every corrupt developer in the tri-state area. I have 3 associates now. We're not just fighting, we're winning. We're the Robin Hoods of real estate, except we don't have to steal from the rich because, well, you are the rich." Maya chuckled, picking up a spray bottle to mist the orchids. "That was the deal, Saul. You protect the little guys, I pay the bills. I don't want anyone else standing in the rain feeling like they have no voice." Saul watched her for a moment, his expression turning serious. He watched her careful, practiced movements with the flowers. To the random customer walking in, she was just the florist with the amber eyes. They had no idea she could cripple a national bank with a single phone call. "Can I ask you something?" Saul asked, his voice lower. "Something I've been wondering for half a year." "Go ahead." "Why did you wait until the very last second?" Saul asked. "You had the power to crush Preston Sterling from day one. You could have saved yourself the stress, the humiliation, the sleepless nights. Why let it get so close to the edge?" Maya set the spray bottle down. She looked out the window at the garden, watching an elderly couple sit on a bench she had commissioned. "My grandfather had a theory," Maya said softly. "He believed that wealth isolates you. It creates a bubble where you never hear the word no, and you never feel the consequences of your actions. He was terrified I would turn into someone like Preston." She turned back to Saul. "If I had used the money to fight him instantly, I would have just been another billionaire throwing weight around." I wouldn't have understood what it felt like to be helpless. I needed to know that I could stand on my own 2 feet before I stood on my family's mountain. I needed to know that the fight was worth it. Not just because I could win, but because I was right. Saul nodded slowly. Well, you certainly proved that. Besides, Maya added, a mischievous glint in her eye. The look on Judge Thorne's face was worth every second of anxiety. Thorne, Saul scoffed. I heard he's working as a consultant for a strip mall in New Jersey now, and as for Preston, before Saul could finish, a shadow fell across the storefront. A sleek, black town car had pulled up to the curb. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was a vehicle of quiet, absolute authority. The driver's door opened, and Arthur Pendleton stepped out. He checked his watch, adjusted his cuffs, and walked into the shop. "Good afternoon, Mr. Berkowitz," Arthur said stiffly, but politely. He turned to Maya. "Chairwoman, the Gulfstream is fueled and waiting at Teterboro. The board meeting in Tokyo is scheduled for 9 a.m. their time. We are cutting it close." Maya sighed, the sound of a woman shifting between worlds. She untied the strings of her green apron. It was a ritual she had performed thousands of times, but now it held a heavier significance. She hung the apron on the brass hook behind the door. Underneath, she wasn't wearing work clothes. She was wearing a tailored cream blouse and slacks that whispered of high-end Italian design. She reached under the counter and pulled out a blazer, slipping it on. In 3 seconds, she transformed from Maya the florist to Maya van der Hoven, head of a global empire. "Duty calls," she said, smoothing her lapels. "Will you be selling the shop now?" Saul asked, a hint of genuine worry in his voice. "Now that the transition is fully complete, you can't possibly have time for weddings and funerals while managing a shipping fleet." Maya looked around the small space. She touched the petals of a white lily. The shop smelled of damp earth and fresh stems. It smelled like home. It smelled like the only place where she was loved for her art, not her assets. "Never," Maya said firmly. "I've hired a manager to handle the Tuesday to Thursday rush. But this?" She tapped the counter. "This stays. This keeps me real. The flowers don't care about my stock price, Saul. They just need water and light. This place reminds me that I'm human." She walked toward the door, Arthur holding it open for her. The cool air of the evening rushed in to meet the scent of the flowers. She stopped and turned back to Saul one last time. "Oh, and Saul? You were asking about Preston Sterling." "Yeah," Saul grinned. "I heard he's been blacklisted from every major development firm in the city. He's desperate." Maya smirked. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it was a satisfied one. "If he calls your office begging for work," Maya said, her voice dry, "tell him Linwood Gardens has an opening." Saul raised an eyebrow. "What position?" "We need someone to shovel the fertilizer for the rose beds," Maya said. "Minimum wage, no benefits. Tell him it's an opportunity to build character." Saul burst out laughing, the sound echoing off the brick walls. "I will deliver the message personally, Chairwoman." Maya stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city was moving fast around her, cars honking, people rushing, the pulse of New York beating steadily. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't struggling to keep up. She was setting the pace. She slid into the back of the black car. Arthur closed the door with a solid thud, sealing her in. As the car pulled away from the curb, gliding past the blooming garden and the little flower shop that had started a war, Maya didn't look back at the past. She looked forward. The nobody in the beige coat was gone. The woman who remained was a force of nature, roots deep in the ground, reaching for the sky and ready to take on the world. And that is how Maya Linwood taught the world that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a florist by her coat. Preston Sterling learned the hard way that true power isn't about how loud you shout, but about what you hold in reserve. Maya proved that dignity and legacy are worth fighting for, no matter the odds. What would you have done if you were in Maya's shoes? Would you have revealed the secret sooner, or waited for the perfect moment to strike? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story about the underdogs winning big. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.